So, Martin, thank you very much for joining me today. I'm very keen to get your insights on a number of topics. The first one being, how do you personally ensure that you and your teams stay adaptable to the changes in your industry?
Thanks, Danny. Thanks for the question. So, I think for me, like this is a multifaceted approach, like a lot of things in leadership. I think first, I always like to look inside the team and see the passions that people have and how you can not alone develop that passion in the person, but how that person can share it with the team. So, a tool I like to use for this is like actually what we just call like a show and tell, just having a dedicated time every week where your team gets together for an hour and people can just share the interesting things they found, be it on like pull requests from a different team, articles they've read, maybe some tools they developed that is helping them in their day to day. I think that's a fundamental thing just to keep that learning as a team and moving forward. I think that's a huge part. The next thing, of course, is helping people find those passions. So some classic tools that people use for that are like hack days or self-development time, which most people know from the classic 20% time from Google, which I think a lot of people always really want. However, I will say with that, the important thing I've always found is keeping it very structured. So when you before you even start like learning and development, you should talk between your manager and talk about and make a plan for what's going to happen over the next maybe 3 months, 6 months, even a year. It could be like, I want to release an open source library. I want to give this talk. I want to join maybe this committee for this library or something like this. Having goals, or even just like, I want to give a talk like to the department. It doesn't have to be big things. It just needs to be clear things. That's the important thing. And I think things always change, but I think the important thing is always to be very clear about when that changes happens. So you make sure you're moving in the right direction still, and you're not just spending time like reading through blogs or forums and trying to find what you need to like become passionate about, which can happen sometimes. Um, I think thinking of ourselves as well as being the technology we're developing, I think can also be quite restricting, to be honest. Like if you're a C++ developer or JavaScript developer or an expert in databases, expertise are fantastic. Companies value them, people look for them, people hire for them. However, your community, even though it might be amazing, is usually still very focused on certain things that mean you just miss maybe that like new architecture that's developed, like or like new data structures or different things like this, and you should really let yourself be open to more stuff than just the technology you're good at right now. And also don't let it define you. I think people a lot of time shy away from like approaching new things to be like, oh no, like I'm an iOS developer or an Android developer, I don't do like AWS or something in the background. I just they're not comfortable, but sometimes having that little bit of like uncomfort actually is the right thing. Just pushing yourself that little bit more can be very valuable and helping people do that. Um, I think also as people reflect back as like engineers and as you become more senior in an organization, even from the time maybe you become like a senior in like your discipline, I think it's important for you to realize that your job is also to interpret new trends, not always to do them, but understand the value that they bring to your organization, because you want to adopt useful technologies and not buzzwords, which can happen so much. People want buzzwords because sometimes it can be great for like, you know, your share prices and stuff like this. As we know with
Yeah.
AI, like I'm very passionate about AI. I think it's going to bring a lot of great things, but like a lot of people are just saying we're adopting AI and not adopting like particular things that will really change our business. They haven't actually nailed that stuff down. They just want that big goal. And a lot of the time, by you helping a company understand these trends and actually focus it and not just have those buzzwords, you can actually help miss giant headaches. I've seen people like sometimes being just giving like buzzwords to go and do like a work group, and then things don't happen. So I think that's an important thing to realize as well. As a leader, even as I said, as an IC, I think it's a critical thing to adopt.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that's a really interesting take. Seeing changes in the industry as a sort of an opportunity for self-development, I think is an amazing way to look at things. Like you say, there's supposedly no limit, is there, on how much you can develop, and I suppose that if you're doing that in line with the industry trends as well, you're only going to benefit yourself and the business. And I think that's a really great way to look at it.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
How integral is having an open mind to becoming a successful leader?
Yeah, it's something that I think is actually fundamental to being a successful leader, be it like a project or a department or even a whole company. I think it's fundamental that you need to do. I've come across a lot of people that think they have the process playbook and they come into leadership and think, this worked before, I'm going to just apply it here. And as we know, each organization is so different. The people are different, the daily culture is different, the domain that you're working in is different, the business like model can be very different. So what you actually need to do can be very different place to place. And that's why it's important to come in with your values and your passions as a leader, and then being open to seeing how you can help people achieve. So I think for me, looking at it as a team level, I think this is important for not taking what I've seen happen before is coming in, you're leading a department or maybe a whole like company, and coming in and saying, okay, we're all going to do exactly the same agile practice. We need to do agile. It's very important. And the rules can be helpful at the start for teams to learn, but soon they can restrict for doing great work. Some people just work very differently. Your teams work very differently in particular, I think. And I think it's important to be adaptable. I've seen so many teams over the years saying after something like that's happened, being like waterfall or Scrum or Kanban or any other agile process doesn't work. And this can really lead to people pushing back against them and not taking the values. And I think the thing I always come back to when we talk about stuff like agile is coming back to the Agile Manifesto and the 12 principles there. And I think the main one I always think about here is like build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment, the support they need, and trust them to get the job done. So fundamentally, like you are there to create the environment for them, not for your team to fit in the environment that you want as a leader. And really recognizing that and working with teams and finding like maybe it is Kanban but slightly different, or maybe it is Scrum but like some tweaks there. And I think like all well-known methods are right for a team, but no method is right for all teams. I think you need to always remember that. I'd say at an organization level, a good example is trying to give clear direction to everyone. I think a lot of people have come across OKRs, which are very like important tool sometimes for really steering a company. But what can happen is we go in and we go, okay, execs get on board, they see what the company needs, that's great. And then, but they try to then start subdividing down into department and sub teams and stuff like this, which can be really good, but it's only a starting point for your quarter. For me, it's very critical to not alone keep iterating on this and not be afraid of the messiness that maybe your OKRs can't capture, because what can commonly happen is that people get an OKR and they just charge at the OKR and they're just focused on that and maybe what's not more important for the whole company, because at the moment we're trying to succeed all together. So sometimes the department, actually the most valuable thing they can do for the company is actually maybe not quite deliver on that OKR, but if they have an expert that only they have in the company, that if they went and worked somewhere else in the company for a month and then came back, that could deliver like 10 times the amount of value. Like you need to be able to shift and be adaptable to those things, which I believe is very fundamental.
Yeah, definitely. No, I completely agree. And like you say, it comes down to it, doesn't it? It's having an open mind and being able to sort of empathize and think, if I was in that person's shoes right now, how would I feel about what I'm being asked to do, or the sort of pressures of the environment at the minute, and adapting your style to maybe account for that, and as you say, harnessing people's abilities through changing your approach on things, and understanding that not everybody's going to fit to your perfect model, but the skill really is being able to change the model to fit the people that you're working with. I think that's essentially the open-mindedness there, isn't it?
Yes, for sure.
Good. Perfect. Thank you very much. So the final question I've got for you then, Martin, is what was the most valuable lesson that you personally have learned about leadership, and how has that sort of shaped your approach really to leading others?
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, I think for me, coming from the engineering side of things, I came in very passionate about mathematics and science and computers and technology. And the thing I learned, which is so fundamental, is just strong communication. It can't be underemphasized like how important that is as your day to day, even as an engineer who needs to go very deep technically. This doesn't just mean the ability to talk. I think people always think about communication. I need to be able to speak here. It's also about being able to understand and perceive others in a very open-minded manner. My go-to for this is not assuming intent, which is something I think a lot of people have to learn. I think for some reason, naturally, we all kind of like want to always read what people are saying. There's like, oh, they said this, maybe they meant this or this or this, or actually, I'm feeling a little insulted because of this. Where actually there was never an insult intended. It was just your interpretation of what they said. And I think like an example of this would be like, if you're in a meeting, you're like quarterly planning or something like this, and someone says we can't execute this proposal, we don't have the time to do it. Like, don't think that they think the idea is bad and there's no value, or that there's something wrong with the people that proposed it. Like, you need to approach it with curiosity, and like, the way you can respond to things like that is like, interesting, like, why do you think that? And then you can follow up with stuff like, what are we doing to give ourselves the time to do this later then? You know what I mean? Like, really just approaching people and just asking honest questions, not leading questions. I think people go like, oh yes, I'll try and lead this back around into my point and make it right. It's about just being open and actually really trying to understand people, and not just the way you think somebody is trying to be portrayed, which I
Yeah.
think is very fundamental. I've worked with several engineers over the years who said somebody was like stopping them from doing the right thing, which for me is always like a very sad state when I hear it. Like, I still hear it to this day from different people in different companies, and it's like those people are just so unmotivated. They don't like feel that their work is valuable because they think they're actually just doing the wrong thing. And this is just fundamentally a breakdown of communication. It's like nobody in an org wants to do the wrong thing. That's not why anyone was there. There's no intent to do a wrong thing. So it means that either like a point was not communicated to a stakeholder correctly, or that the stakeholder didn't explain and give context to the proposal about why it couldn't be done in the context that someone needed. This is why I spend a lot of time with people working on like communication, be it like, spoken, like giving talks, listening, or written. It's like such a fundamental part. And I think if any engineer wants to, even like if they want to keep and be a staff engineer and a principal engineer, they want to go into management and go in that kind of a leadership track, you need communication either way. Like, either
Yeah.
track requires it. It's like the fundamental thing to like, especially as you come to be a senior, that's important. But then moving onwards, it's like necessary. People that'll be over half your job in most organizations is doing stuff like that. So I think for me, that's the biggest lesson I've learned.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you're completely right with that. I think it's even more important now, isn't it? Now that we've transitioned to a more sort of remote working culture, a lot of time you are relying on messages portrayed through email or through maybe like a Microsoft Teams message, and I think they're very easy to misinterpret, aren't they, often? So
Yeah.
yeah, I think you're sort of being clear in written, and obviously I suppose being open to giving somebody a call, and rather than jumping to the first conclusion, giving them opportunity to explain it through a call or through spoken word as well,
Yeah.
before making your assumption on what the message actually meant.
Exactly. And I just want to give a quick recommendation. If somebody is like looking to jump off in this journey and improve their communication, look up the tool nonviolent communication, because it's about meeting people where they are and not where you are. And it's an important tool to learn. I think that's a great place for people to start if they want something to